The moment Tyler pulled out his phone to show me his latest NFT purchase, I knew my carefully constructed double life was about to collide in the most spectacular way possible. There I was, sitting across from my ex-boyfriend in a crowded Starbucks in downtown Austin, listening to him explain blockchain technology to me like I was a confused child, while the very artwork he was bragging about was something I had created, minted, and sold to him for $37,000 just 2 weeks earlier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. He had no idea that the woman he'd dismissed as too emotional for finance during our toxic 3-year relationship was actually the anonymous digital artist behind Crypto Mystic, one of the most sought-after NFT collections in the space. He didn't know that while he was mansplaining decentralized finance to me, I was sitting on a crypto portfolio worth over $4 million. And he certainly didn't know that I'd been documenting every condescending conversation, every stolen idea, and every time he'd taken credit for my work during our relationship. But I was about to teach him exactly what happens when you underestimate the woman you tried to keep small. My name is Maya Rodriguez, and 6 months ago I was just another broke art graduate working at a coffee shop in East Austin, watching my ex-boyfriend Tyler Brennan become everything I'd helped him achieve, while I struggled to pay rent on a studio apartment that barely qualified as livable space. Today, I'm about to destroy his entire carefully constructed empire using nothing but the truth and a level of strategic thinking that would make Sun Tzu proud. The irony of our Starbucks meeting wasn't lost on me. Tyler had suggested we grab coffee to catch up like adults after running into each other at a tech networking event the night before. What he really wanted was to show off his newfound success in the crypto space, the same space I'd introduced him to during our relationship when I was exploring blockchain technology for my digital art thesis. Back then, he'd called my interest in cryptocurrency a cute hobby, and suggested I focus on more realistic career paths like graphic design for local businesses. I'd agreed to meet him partly out of curiosity about how shameless he'd become, but mostly because I wanted to see his reaction when he inevitably tried to educate me about the industry I'd been quietly dominating for the past 8 months. Tyler never could resist an opportunity to be the smartest person in the room, especially when that room contained his ex-girlfriend who he still believed was struggling to make ends meet. The coffee shop was buzzing with the usual mix of remote workers, students, and startup bros, discussing their latest ventures in voices loud enough to ensure everyone heard about their success. Tyler had claimed a table near the window, and I spotted him immediately when I walked in. He looked exactly the same: disheveled dark hair, expensive clothes that tried too hard to look casual, and that self-satisfied smirk that had once been charming but now made my skin crawl. He stood up when he saw me, opening his arms for a hug that I reluctantly accepted, while fighting the urge to point out that his designer jacket probably cost more than I used to make in a month at the coffee shop where he'd often visit me, just to complain about his day. "Maya, you look great," he said, though his eyes were already scanning my outfit, probably calculating its value and filing away details he could use to maintain his mental image of my financial situation. I was wearing jeans and a vintage band t-shirt, carefully chosen to reinforce his assumptions about my circumstances. The truth was that I could afford to dress however I wanted now, but Tyler's arrogance was about to be a very useful tool. "Thanks, Tyler. You look successful," I replied, settling into the chair across from him and noting how he'd positioned himself so the light from the window would highlight his features. Even in casual conversation, Tyler was performing. "Things have been going really well," he said, launching immediately into what I recognized as his standard success pitch. "The fintech startup I told you about last year really took off. We got acquired by a major bank, and I'm heading up their crypto division now. It's incredible timing with how hot the space is right now." I nodded politely, remembering how that fintech startup had actually been my idea, born from countless late-night conversations where I'd shared my research about blockchain applications in traditional banking. Tyler had been struggling to find his footing at his consulting job back then, and I'd spent hours helping him understand the technology, even connecting him with developers I'd met through online crypto communities. By the time he pitched the concept to his company as his own idea, I was already deep into building my own presence in the NFT world. "That's amazing," I said, taking a sip of my coffee, I remember you mentioning something about blockchain technology. It all seemed so complicated back then. Tyler's eyes lit up with the familiar gleam of someone about to deliver an unsolicited education. Oh, it's not that complicated once you understand the fundamentals. See, blockchain is basically just a distributed ledger system where transactions are verified by network consensus rather than centralized authorities. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Tyler was explaining blockchain to me using the exact same analogy I'd taught him 3 years ago, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his own expertise. The temptation to interrupt him with technical details that would expose the shallow depth of his understanding was almost overwhelming, but I had bigger plans for this conversation. Wow, that actually makes sense when you explain it like that, I said, watching his chest puff up with pride. So this is what you're working on at the bank? Part of it, yeah. But the really exciting stuff is happening in the NFT space. Non-fungible tokens. Digital ownership certificates for unique assets. It's revolutionizing how we think about art, collectibles, intellectual property. Tyler pulled out his phone, opening what I immediately recognized as OpenSea, one of the major NFT marketplaces. I've been collecting some really high-end pieces. Want to see? My heart rate accelerated as Tyler scrolled through his collection, each piece representing hundreds or thousands of dollars he'd spent on digital art, while simultaneously believing his ex-girlfriend was too financially illiterate to understand cryptocurrency. The collection was impressive, I had to admit, though seeing my own work displayed among pieces by artists whose careers I'd been following for years felt surreal. This one's my favorite, Tyler said, stopping on a piece I recognized immediately. It was from my Crypto Mystic collection, a digital painting I'd called Quantum Dreams, that featured swirling galaxies rendered in electric blues and purples, with mathematical equations floating through the cosmic landscape like celestial bodies. I'd spent 3 weeks perfecting the piece, incorporating actual quantum physics formulas I'd researched to ensure the scientific accuracy that had become my signature style. It's beautiful, I said truthfully, studying my own artwork displayed on Tyler's phone screen. What makes it special? Tyler leaned forward conspiratorially, clearly excited to share insider knowledge. The artist goes by Crypto Mystic. Nobody knows who they are, but their work is insanely technical and mathematically precise. See these equations floating in the background? Those are real quantum mechanics formulas. Most digital artists just throw random symbols around, but this person actually understands the science. I nodded appreciatively while internally celebrating the fact that my dedication to research and accuracy had become part of my artistic reputation. How much did something like that cost? $37,000, Tyler said with the casual tone of someone discussing lunch prices.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
I got it early though. Crypto Mystic's floor price is already up to $60,000 for new pieces. Whoever this artist is, they're gonna be huge. I'm thinking about buying more before they really blow up. The absurdity of the situation was almost too much to process. Tyler was sitting across from me, bragging about spending $37,000 on my artwork, while explaining cryptocurrency markets to me like I was a curious child. The same Tyler who used to lecture me about realistic financial goals and suggest I get a stable job with benefits instead of pursuing art, was now unknowingly funding my career while positioning himself as an expert in my field. That's so smart of you to invest early, I said, meaning it more than he could possibly know. How did you learn about all this stuff? It seems like you really know what you're doing. Tyler's smirk widened as he settled into full mansplaining mode. I've always been good at spotting trends before they go mainstream. It's about understanding market psychology and technology adoption cycles. Most people, especially in traditional finance, don't get crypto yet. They think it's just digital funny money. But smart investors recognize that we're looking at the future of value transfer and digital ownership. I listened to Tyler recycle talking points from crypto Twitter and YouTube videos, presenting ideas I'd been exploring and discussing in online forums for years as his own insights. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Here was someone who'd consistently undermined my intelligence and creativity during our relationship, now confidently explaining concepts he'd learned from surface-level research, while completely missing the irony that he was talking to someone who'd been quietly building a career in the space he was trying to colonize. The key, Tyler continued, warming to his favorite topic himself, is understanding that NFTs aren't just about the art. They're about provable digital ownership, community building, utility integration. Like, this crypto mystic collection I'm invested in, there are rumors about special utilities coming for holders, private Discord channels, early access to new drops, maybe even physical merchandise. I nearly choked on my coffee. Tyler was describing features I'd been planning for my community, ideas I'd been developing based on feedback from my actual collectors and supporters in various crypto communities. The fact that he was speculating about my future plans while completely unaware of my identity was both hilarious and infuriating. You seem to really understand this space, I said carefully. Have you ever thought about creating anything yourself? Like digital art or content? Tyler laughed dismissively, the same laugh I'd heard countless times when I'd shared my creative ideas during our relationship. I'm more of an investor and strategist. I leave the creative stuff to the artists. My strength is recognizing value and market opportunities. Though I do have some ideas for NFT projects that could be really successful if I found the right artist to execute them. The casual way he said it, as if artists were just contractors waiting to execute his brilliant visions, perfectly encapsulated everything that had been wrong with our relationship. Tyler had always seen creativity as a service industry that existed to support his ambitions, rather than recognizing artistic work as valuable in its own right. During our 3 years together, he'd consistently positioned himself as the business mind who could make my art commercially viable, while treating my creative process as a hobby that needed his guidance to become legitimate. What kind of ideas? I asked, genuinely curious about what Tyler thought constituted innovative NFT concepts. Well, like, what if you combined financial education with digital art? Like, create NFTs that teach people about investing and cryptocurrency, but make them visually appealing. Or collections that represent different investment strategies. I think there's a huge market for educational content in the crypto space, especially for people who are intimidated by the technical aspects. I stared at Tyler in amazement as he described, almost word for word, the concept for my next collection that I'd been developing for the past month. Educational NFTs that made complex financial concepts accessible through visual storytelling, designed specifically for people who felt excluded from traditional finance. I'd been working on the project in secret, planning to launch it as a way to democratize financial literacy through art. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't coincidence. Tyler hadn't independently conceived an idea that happened to match my current project. Somehow, he'd gotten access to information about my work, either through mutual connections in the Austin tech scene, or through online communities where I'd been discussing the concept under my pseudonym. That's a really interesting idea, I managed to say, my mind racing through possibilities. Have you shared this concept with anyone else? Just some people in my network who might be interested in funding something like that, Tyler said casually. I've got connections with several crypto VCs now. If I could find the right artist, I think we could put together a really compelling pitch. The phrase, if I could find the right artist, echoed in my head as I realized what Tyler was planning. He wasn't just brainstorming random NFT ideas. He was actively preparing to commercialize concepts that weren't his, using his newfound connections in the crypto industry to position himself as an innovator, while treating artists as interchangeable resources to execute his vision. I thought about all the times during our relationship when Tyler had helped me refine my ideas, always managing to insert himself as a crucial component of any potential success. How he'd insisted on being included in my artist statements and grant applications because his business perspective would strengthen my proposals. How he'd gradually taken over conversations with gallery owners and collectors, positioning himself as my representative, while simultaneously undermining my confidence in my ability to advocate for myself. The pattern was exactly the same, just scaled up to match his increased influence and resources. Tyler was planning to colonize the NFT space using other people's creativity and labor, just like he'd tried to colonize my artistic career during our relationship. The only difference was that now he had the financial resources and industry connections to actually pull it off. You know, I said slowly, I actually know some artists who work in digital media. Would you want me to connect you with any of them? Tyler's eyes lit up with interest. Really? That would be awesome. Are any of them familiar with NFTs and blockchain technology? A few of them, yeah. There's this whole community of digital artists who've been working in crypto for a while now. Some of them are doing really innovative stuff with smart contracts and programmable art. Perfect. I'd love to meet them. Especially if they're technical enough to understand the business side of things. A lot of artists just want to create without thinking about market dynamics or monetization strategies. I nodded sympathetically while internally cataloging every condescending assumption Tyler was making about artists and their business acumen. The irony that he was saying this to someone who'd built a multi-million-dollar crypto art practice while he was still figuring out how to buy NFTs was almost too perfect. I'll definitely make some introductions, I promised. Though some of these artists are pretty protective of their work and their communities, the crypto art world can be kind of insular. I get that. But I think once they see the opportunities I can bring to the table, they'll be interested in collaborating. It's really about finding artists who are ready to think bigger than just creating individual pieces. Tyler's confidence that artists would naturally want to work with him once they understood his value proposition was exactly the kind of arrogance that had made our relationship unsustainable. He genuinely believed that his business knowledge was so valuable that creative people would be grateful for the opportunity to execute his ideas. Regardless of whether those ideas were original or whether he understood the artistic communities he was trying to penetrate. I'm sure they will be, I said with a smile that Tyler interpreted as admiration but was actually the expression of someone planning a very elaborate surprise. As our conversation continued, Tyler shared more details about his position at the bank, his connections in the Austin tech scene, and his plans for expanding into crypto investing and entrepreneurship. Every piece of information he shared was another tool I could use to understand exactly how he'd positioned himself in the industry and what vulnerabilities might exist in his carefully constructed success story. The most revealing part of our conversation came when Tyler started talking about his work at the bank's crypto division. He described projects that sounded suspiciously similar to research I'd seen from other companies, using language that suggested he was more of a coordinator than an innovator. When I asked specific technical questions about blockchain implementations and security protocols, his answers became vague and relied heavily on buzzwords rather than substantive explanations. It became clear that Tyler's role at the bank was more about business development and client relations than actual cryptocurrency expertise. He was essentially a traditional finance professional who'd been repositioned to interface with crypto companies, using his networking skills and institutional credibility to bridge the gap between old and new financial systems. It was a valuable role, but not the technical leadership position he was implying. The learning curve has been steep, Tyler admitted when I pressed him on some of the more technical aspects of his work. But I've got a great team of developers and blockchain specialists who handle the technical implementation. My job is more about strategy and partnerships. Which meant Tyler was dependent on other people's technical expertise to maintain his position in the crypto industry. He'd successfully networked his way into a prestigious role, but his actual knowledge was limited to what he'd absorbed through proximity to experts rather than deep study or hands-on experience. It was the same pattern I'd observed during our relationship, where Tyler would quickly learn enough about my interests to position himself as knowledgeable, while never developing genuine expertise. That makes sense, I said. It's probably better to focus on your strengths and let other people handle the technical stuff. Exactly. I mean, I understand the technology well enough to make informed decisions, but I'm not trying to be a developer. My value is in seeing the big picture and identifying opportunities. As Tyler continued to elaborate on his strategic vision for the crypto industry, I found myself genuinely impressed by his ability to sound authoritative, while saying very little of substance. It was a skill that had served him well throughout his career, allowing him to insert himself into conversations and projects where his actual contribution was minimal, but his presence felt significant. The more Tyler talked, the clearer it became that his success was built on a foundation of networking, confidence, and strategic positioning, rather than innovative thinking or technical expertise. He'd identified cryptocurrency as an emerging market where traditional credentials could still provide an advantage, and he'd successfully leveraged his finance background to establish himself as a bridge between institutional money and crypto innovation. It was a smart career move, I had to admit, but it was also exactly the kind of opportunistic behavior that had characterized our entire relationship. Tyler had a talent for identifying valuable trends and positioning himself to benefit from them, often by appropriating other people's work or insights and repackaging them as his own strategic vision. "You know what's funny?" Tyler said as our conversation began winding down. "I keep thinking about how different things could have been if you'd been more interested in this stuff when we were together. You always had good instincts about technology and design. If you'd been willing to learn about business and finance, we could have made a great team in this space." The comment was so perfectly Tyler that I almost laughed out loud. Even when acknowledging my abilities, he couldn't resist framing them as incomplete without his business expertise. The suggestion that I should have been more interested in cryptocurrency when I was literally the one who'd introduced him to the technology was breathtakingly revisionist, but entirely consistent with Tyler's tendency to rewrite history in ways that centered his contributions. "Maybe in another life," I said diplomatically, while thinking about how Tyler's definition of making a great team had always involved him taking credit for collaborative work while I provided the actual labor and expertise. "Yeah, well, you seem happy with your life now," Tyler said, and I could hear the subtle condescension in his voice as he glanced around the coffee shop, probably assuming I was still working service jobs and struggling to pay rent. "Are you still doing art stuff?" "Here and there," I said vaguely. "More as a hobby these days." Tyler nodded sympathetically, as if my artistic pursuits were a quaint phase I'd eventually outgrow once I accepted the need for more practical career choices. The irony that I was currently earning more from my hobby than he was making at his prestigious banking job was delicious, but I wasn't ready to reveal that particular truth yet. "Well, if you ever want to get more serious about it, let me know," Tyler offered generously. "I might be able to help you find some commercial opportunities. There's always demand for good design work in the startup world." "I'll keep that in mind," I said, marveling at Tyler's assumption that my artistic career needed his intervention to become legitimate. The offer to help me find commercial opportunities was particularly rich, coming from someone who was unknowingly funding my current success through his NFT purchases. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, Tyler insisted on paying for both our drinks, a gesture that felt more like a power display than genuine generosity. "It was really good to see you, Maya. We should do this again soon." "Definitely," I agreed, knowing that our next interaction would be very different from this one. Walking back to my car, I felt the familiar rush of clarity that came when a complex plan began falling into place. Tyler had given me everything I needed to understand his position in the crypto industry, his vulnerabilities, and his continued pattern of appropriating other people's work. More importantly, he'd revealed that he was actively looking for artists to exploit for his NFT projects, using concepts that weren't his own and connections he'd built through my initial introduction to cryptocurrency. The woman who'd walked into that coffee shop was still playing the role of Tyler's struggling ex-girlfriend. The woman who walked out was someone with the resources, knowledge, and motivation to teach Tyler exactly what happened when you underestimated the wrong person. 6 months earlier, I'd been exactly who Tyler thought I was, a broke art graduate working at a coffee shop, watching my ex-boyfriend achieve success using ideas I'd helped him develop. But that woman had used her pain as fuel to build something Tyler couldn't imagine, something that made his arrogance not just insulting, but strategically stupid. Tyler thought he was planning to colonize the NFT space using other people's creativity. What he didn't realize was that he'd just revealed his entire strategy to one of the most successful artists in the industry he was trying to exploit. And I was about to show him exactly why that was a mistake. The transformation from victim to hunter was complete. Now it was time for Tyler to learn what happened when the prey fought back. The drive back to my apartment in East Austin gave me exactly the clarity I needed to process what had just happened and begin formulating a response that would be both devastating and completely justified. Tyler's casual dismissal of artists as resources to be managed, combined with his obvious plans to appropriate concepts that weren't his, had crystallized something that had been building in my mind for months. This wasn't just about getting revenge on an ex-boyfriend who'd wronged me. This was about protecting an entire community of creators from exactly the kind of predatory behavior Tyler represented. My apartment looked nothing like what Tyler would expect if he could see it now. The cramped studio I'd been living in during our relationship had been replaced by a spacious loft in one of Austin's most desirable neighborhoods, complete with a dedicated art studio equipped with high-end digital workstations and professional lighting. The walls were covered with prints of my NFT collections, pieces that had sold for tens of thousands of dollars each, creating a gallery-like atmosphere that reflected both my artistic evolution and my financial success. I settled into my primary workstation, a custom-built computer system that could handle the most demanding digital art software, and opened my encrypted communication channels with the crypto art community I'd been building relationships with for the past year. What Tyler didn't understand about the NFT world was that it operated more like a tight-knit creative collective than a traditional marketplace. Artists shared information, supported each other's work, and maintained informal networks that could make or break careers depending on how someone conducted themselves within the community. My first message went to Elena Vasquez, a digital artist based in Mexico City who'd become one of my closest collaborators and friends in the crypto space. Elena specialized in algorithmic art that incorporated social justice themes, and her work had gained significant recognition for its technical innovation and political relevance. More importantly for my current situation, Elena had an extensive network of contacts throughout the Latin American crypto art scene, and a reputation for being fiercely protective of artist rights. "Elena, I need to talk to you about something urgent," I typed in our private Discord channel. "There's a situation developing that could affect our entire community, and I think you'll want to know about it." Elena's response came within minutes, which didn't surprise me given that she kept irregular hours and was often working late into the night. "What's going on, Maya? You sound serious." I spent the next hour explaining my encounter with Tyler, providing Elena with screenshots of his NFT collection that prominently featured my work, and outlining his plans to recruit artists for projects based on concepts he'd appropriated. Elena's responses evolved from curiosity to disbelief to righteous anger as she began to understand the scope of what Tyler was attempting. "This is exactly the kind of exploitation we've been warning people about," Elena wrote. "Traditional finance bros trying to colonize crypto art without understanding or respecting the communities that built this space. How do you want to handle this?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted, "but I think we need to document everything and make sure other artists know what they're potentially getting into if Tyler approaches them." "Agreed. But Maya, you realize you're in a unique position here, right? You have evidence of his patterns, you understand his methods, and you have the resources to actually do something about this. Most artists who get exploited by people like Tyler don't have those advantages." Elena was right, and her observation helped me recognize that my situation was about more than personal vindication. I had access to Tyler's network, knowledge of his plans, and the financial resources to mount an effective response. More importantly, I had credibility within the crypto art community that could help protect other artists from falling victim to Tyler's predatory approach. My next message went to Marcus Chen, a developer and artist who'd built several of the smart contract systems I used for my NFT drops. Marcus was based in San Francisco but maintained connections throughout the tech industry, including relationships with venture capital firms and crypto investment funds. If Tyler was planning to seek funding for his NFT projects, Marcus would be able to help me understand the investor landscape and potentially identify who Tyler might approach. "Marcus, I need some research help," I wrote. "There's someone in Austin who's been talking about launching NFT projects with venture backing. Can you help me understand how that funding process typically works and who the major players are?" Marcus was always eager to discuss the business side of crypto art, and his response included detailed information about investment trends, funding mechanisms, and the specific venture capital firms that had been most active in NFT investments. More importantly, he offered to make some discreet inquiries about Tyler's background and connections within the industry. "If this person is trying to raise money for NFT projects, there are only a handful of firms in Texas that would be interested," Marcus explained. I can reach out to some contacts and see if anyone's heard about Austin-based crypto art ventures looking for funding. While Marcus began his research, I turned my attention to building a comprehensive case file that documented Tyler's history of appropriating other people's work and ideas. I started with our relationship, creating a timeline that traced how Tyler had gradually inserted himself into my artistic process and academic research. I had emails where Tyler had edited my artist statements to include references to his business insights, grant applications where he'd insisted on being listed as a collaborator, and documentation of presentations where he'd presented my research as joint work without acknowledging my primary authorship. The pattern was even clearer when I looked at Tyler's professional trajectory after our breakup. His successful pitch to his consulting company about blockchain applications in traditional banking had been based almost entirely on research I'd shared with him during our relationship. The fintech startup that had eventually been acquired by his current employer had used concepts and connections I'd developed through my cryptocurrency studies. Even his current position as head of the bank's crypto division was built on expertise he'd gained through proximity to my work rather than independent study. But the most damning evidence was Tyler's NFT collection itself. I spent several hours analyzing his purchase history, cross-referencing the dates of his acquisitions with market trends and community discussions. What I discovered was that Tyler wasn't just collecting NFTs randomly. He was systematically purchasing work from emerging artists who were gaining recognition within specific subcommunities, often buying pieces just before they experienced significant price increases. The purchasing pattern suggested that Tyler had access to insider information about which artists were likely to break out, or which collections were being promoted by influential community members. Since Tyler wasn't deeply embedded in crypto art communities himself, he had to be getting this information from someone else, most likely through the professional network he'd built at his bank or through other collectors who trusted him with investment insights. Elena's response to this discovery was immediate and angry. "This is market manipulation," she wrote. "If Tyler is using insider information to profit from NFT purchases while simultaneously planning to exploit the same artists for his own projects, that's not just unethical, it could be illegal." "What do you mean illegal?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Securities fraud, market manipulation, potentially wire fraud if he's using electronic communications to coordinate any of this. The same laws that apply to traditional financial markets are starting to be enforced in crypto spaces, especially when institutional money is involved." Elena's observation opened up an entirely new dimension to my understanding of Tyler's behavior. I'd been thinking about this situation primarily in terms of personal betrayal and community protection, but if Tyler was engaging in actual securities violations, the stakes were much higher than I'd initially realized. I spent the rest of the evening researching financial regulations that applied to cryptocurrency markets, particularly focusing on how traditional securities laws were being interpreted and enforced in the NFT space. What I learned was that the regulatory landscape was evolving rapidly, with enforcement agencies increasingly treating certain NFT transactions as securities offerings subject to federal oversight. If Tyler was using material non-public information to make investment decisions in the NFT market, particularly if that information came from his position at a regulated financial institution, he could be violating multiple federal laws. More importantly, if he was planning to use his investment profits to fund NFT projects that appropriated other people's intellectual property, he was potentially building an entire business model on criminal activity. The implications were staggering. Tyler wasn't just being an opportunistic ex-boyfriend trying to capitalize on crypto trends. He was potentially engaging in systematic financial crimes while using his institutional credibility to legitimize his activities. The scope of the problem was much larger than I'd initially understood, and the potential consequences for both Tyler and the artists he was targeting were severe. Marcus's research confirmed my suspicions about Tyler's funding strategy. I talked to 3 different VCs who've heard pitches about NFT educational platforms in the past month, he reported. One of them specifically mentioned someone from Austin with banking connections who was looking for artists to partner with on financial literacy projects. "Did they say anything else about the pitch?" I asked, though I was fairly certain I already knew what Marcus had discovered. The investor I talked to said the concept was interesting, but the execution plan was vague. Apparently, this person had big ideas about combining art and finance education, but hadn't actually identified specific artists or developed concrete project proposals. The investor got the impression that the person was still in early stages of development, which meant Tyler was already actively shopping his appropriated concept to venture capital firms without having secured any actual creative partners or developed original content. He was essentially trying to raise money based on ideas that weren't his, promising to deliver artistic work he didn't have the ability to create, and positioning himself as the visionary behind a project that existed primarily in his imagination. There's something else, Marcus continued. The investor mentioned that this person claimed to have connections with successful crypto artists who were interested in commercial partnerships. If Tyler is implying that he has relationships with established artists without actually having those partnerships secured, that could be investment fraud. I felt a cold clarity settling over me as the full scope of Tyler's scheme became apparent. He wasn't just planning to exploit individual artists or appropriate specific concepts. He was building an entire fraudulent investment opportunity based on lies about his creative partnerships, misrepresentations about his industry expertise, and stolen intellectual property that he was presenting as his own original vision. The revelation transformed my approach to the situation completely. This wasn't about personal revenge anymore. Tyler was potentially defrauding investors while simultaneously planning to exploit artists, using his institutional credibility to legitimize activities that could harm everyone involved. The scope of the problem required a response that went beyond individual retaliation to actual community protection and legal accountability. My next message went to David Park, a lawyer based in Los Angeles who specialized in intellectual property law and had been helping crypto artists navigate legal issues related to digital ownership and copyright protection. David had become something of a legend in the NFT community for his willingness to take on cases that protected artists' rights, often working pro bono when individual creators couldn't afford traditional legal representation. David, I need to discuss a situation that involves potential securities fraud and intellectual property theft in the NFT space, I wrote, summarizing Tyler's activities and the evidence I'd gathered. This could affect multiple artists and investors, and I think it requires legal intervention. David's response came the next morning, and his tone was appropriately serious. Maya, what you're describing sounds like a pattern of criminal activity that could have significant consequences for everyone involved. If this person is misrepresenting his relationships with artists to attract investment, using insider information to manipulate NFT markets, and planning to appropriate other people's intellectual property for commercial projects, we're looking at multiple federal crimes. What kind of timeline are we talking about for legal action? I asked, thinking about Tyler's active fundraising efforts and his plans to recruit artists. Depending on the strength of the evidence and the cooperation of potential victims, we could potentially have criminal referrals filed within weeks. But we'd need comprehensive documentation and testimony from affected parties. Are you prepared to go public with this information? The question forced me to confront the reality that pursuing legal action against Tyler would require me to reveal my identity as crypto mystic and potentially expose other aspects of my crypto art career that I'd kept private. It would mean giving up the anonymity that had allowed me to operate independently and build my reputation based purely on my artistic merit rather than personal connections or industry politics. But as I considered the alternatives, I realized that protecting my secret identity was less important than protecting other artists from Tyler's predatory behavior and preventing investors from being defrauded by his misrepresentations. The crypto art community had given me opportunities and support that had transformed my life. Now it was time to use my success and resources to protect that community from exactly the kind of exploitation Tyler represented. Yes, I told David. I'm prepared to go public with everything. The decision to reveal my identity as crypto mystic required careful planning and coordination with multiple stakeholders in the crypto art community. Elena immediately offered to help coordinate communications with other artists who might be affected, while Marcus volunteered to reach out to his contacts in the venture capital world to warn them about Tyler's misrepresentations. But before I could move forward with legal action, I needed to gather additional evidence that would make Tyler's criminal activities undeniable. David had explained that securities fraud cases required clear documentation of misrepresentations made to investors, and intellectual property theft required proof that Tyler had access to original ideas and subsequently presented them as his own work. I spent the next 3 days developing a comprehensive investigative strategy that would document Tyler's activities while protecting the interests of other artists and investors who might be affected. The plan required coordination with multiple people across different aspects of the crypto industry, but the scope of Tyler's scheme demanded a response that was equally systematic and comprehensive. My first step was to create a detailed timeline that connected Tyler's NFT purchases with his access to market information and community insights. I analyzed transaction records, cross-referenced purchase dates with community discussions and price movements, and identified patterns that suggested Tyler was making investment decisions based on non-public information about upcoming artist collaborations and platform promotions. The analysis revealed that Tyler's collection wasn't just successful, it was suspiciously successful. His hit rate for purchasing NFTs that subsequently experienced significant price increases was far higher than what would be expected from random market participation or even skilled analysis of public information. The pattern strongly suggested that Tyler had access to insider information about market movements and artist activities. Elena helped me reach out to several of the artists whose work Tyler had purchased, asking them to review their communications and marketing activities around the time of his purchases. What we discovered was that Tyler had been systematically monitoring crypto art communities, Discord servers, and social media channels to identify artists who were receiving support from influential collectors or planning collaborations with major platforms. He's been lurking in our communities for months, reported Sofia Martinez, a digital artist whose work Tyler had purchased just days before she announced a collaboration with a major NFT platform. I started noticing this account that would join our Discord discussions but never contribute anything meaningful, just asking questions about upcoming projects and release schedules. The revelation that Tyler had been conducting surveillance on crypto art communities while presenting himself as a casual collector added another layer to his deceptive practices. He wasn't just making opportunistic investments. He was systematically gathering intelligence that he used to gain unfair advantages in the market, while simultaneously planning to exploit the same communities for his own commercial projects. Marcus's investigation into Tyler's funding activities produced even more concerning evidence. I talked to 4 different investment firms that have received pitches from Tyler in the past month, Marcus reported. Each pitch described slightly different artist partnerships and project timelines, but all of them claimed to have established relationships with successful crypto artists who were eager to work on commercial applications. Did any of the investors ask for verification of these partnerships? I asked. 2 of them did, and Tyler apparently provided documentation that looked legitimate but couldn't be independently verified. Email exchanges, project proposals, marketing materials. Professional-looking stuff that would be convincing to investors who aren't familiar with the crypto art community. The implication was clear. Tyler was creating fraudulent documentation to support his fundraising efforts, producing fake evidence of artist partnerships and project development that didn't exist outside of his imagination. The sophistication of his deceptions suggested that he'd been planning this scheme for months, possibly since before our encounter at the coffee shop. David's analysis of the legal implications was sobering. What you've uncovered constitutes securities fraud, wire fraud, potentially money laundering if Tyler is using NFT sales to disguise the sources of his investment profits, and criminal copyright infringement if he moves forward with projects based on stolen intellectual property. How strong is the case? I asked, knowing that successful prosecution would require evidence that met federal standards for criminal conviction. With the documentation you've gathered and testimony from affected artists and investors very strong, the pattern of deception is clear, the financial damages are substantial, and the evidence of intent is overwhelming. Tyler has left a paper trail that would be difficult to explain away in court. But David also warned me that pursuing criminal charges against Tyler would likely result in significant media attention and public scrutiny of my own activities in the crypto art space. You've been operating under a pseudonym for privacy reasons, but this case would make you a public figure in the crypto community. Are you prepared for that level of exposure? The question forced me to consider not just the immediate consequences of revealing my identity, but the long-term implications for my artistic career and personal life. Crypto Mystic had become a respected name in the NFT world, precisely because my work was evaluated on its own merits, rather than personal connections or social media presence. Revealing my identity would fundamentally change how people perceived and interacted with my art. But as I thought about Tyler's plans to exploit other artists and defraud investors, I realized that protecting my anonymity was less important than preventing him from causing harm to the community that had supported my success. The crypto art world had given me opportunities that traditional art institutions had never offered, and now it was time to use my success to protect other artists who might not have the resources or knowledge to defend themselves against Tyler's predatory behavior. "I'm ready," I told David, "but I want to make sure we do this in a way that protects other artists and prevents Tyler from causing more damage while we're building the case." David agreed to coordinate with federal prosecutors, while Elena and Marcus helped me reach out to crypto art communities to warn them about Tyler's activities without compromising the ongoing investigation. The strategy required careful balance between public awareness and legal effectiveness, but the scope of Tyler's scheme demanded a response that was both immediate and comprehensive. The final piece of my investigation focused on Tyler's current activities at the bank and his use of institutional resources to support his crypto art investments and fundraising efforts. If Tyler was using his position at a regulated financial institution to facilitate securities fraud or market manipulation, the consequences would extend beyond individual criminal charges to potential regulatory violations that could affect his employer and other industry participants. Elena helped me identify several crypto art community members who worked in traditional finance and might have insights into how banks were approaching cryptocurrency investments and regulatory compliance. What we learned was that Tyler's employer, like most traditional financial institutions, had strict policies about employees' personal crypto investments and required disclosure of any activities that might create conflicts of interest or regulatory exposure. If Tyler is using bank resources or information to support personal crypto investments, that's a firing offense at minimum, explained Jennifer Walsh, a compliance officer at a major investment bank who'd become involved in crypto art as a collector. If he's using his position to facilitate securities fraud, the bank could face regulatory sanctions that could affect their entire crypto division. The revelation that Tyler's criminal activities could potentially harm his employer and other industry participants added another dimension to the case that made legal action even more urgent. Tyler wasn't just defrauding individual investors and exploiting individual artists. His activities could undermine legitimate institutional efforts to develop cryptocurrency services and damage the reputation of traditional financial institutions that were trying to operate responsibly in the crypto space. As I compiled the final elements of the evidence package that would be submitted to federal prosecutors, I reflected on how completely Tyler had misunderstood both my capabilities and the strength of the crypto art community he was trying to exploit. His assumption that artists were unsophisticated and disconnected had blinded him to the reality that crypto art communities were actually highly networked, technically savvy, and increasingly capable of protecting themselves against exactly the kind of predatory behavior he represented. Tyler had seen the crypto art world as an opportunity to exploit artists who were too focused on creativity to understand business or finance. What he'd failed to recognize was that many crypto artists were also technologists, entrepreneurs, and sophisticated investors who understood both the artistic and commercial aspects of their work. His outdated assumptions about artists' business acumen had led him to underestimate the very community he was trying to colonize. More importantly, Tyler had failed to understand that the crypto art community operated on principles of transparency, collaboration, and mutual support that made his deceptive practices particularly visible and offensive to other participants. The same technologies that enabled NFT creation and trading also enabled rapid communication and information sharing that could expose fraudulent activities much faster than traditional art markets. As I prepared to submit the evidence package to federal prosecutors, I realized that Tyler's scheme had actually strengthened the crypto art community by forcing artists and investors to develop better protective mechanisms and communication networks. His predatory behavior had catalyzed exactly the kind of collective action that would make similar schemes much more difficult to execute in the future. The investigation that had started as personal vindication against an ex-boyfriend who'd wronged me had evolved into something much larger and more significant. Tyler's criminal activities had provided an opportunity to demonstrate that the crypto art community could effectively protect itself against exploitation while holding bad actors accountable for their actions. Within days, I would be ready to reveal Tyler's fraudulent scheme to federal prosecutors, crypto art communities, and the venture capital firms he'd been attempting to defraud. The evidence was comprehensive, the legal case was strong, and the community support was overwhelming. Tyler had approached the crypto art world, believing he could exploit it the same way he'd exploited my work during our relationship. Instead, he was about to discover that underestimating the wrong community could be just as dangerous as underestimating the wrong person. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and this time, there would be nowhere to hide. The moment had arrived to execute the plan that would expose Tyler's fraudulent empire and protect the crypto art community from his predatory schemes. Federal prosecutors had reviewed my evidence package and agreed to coordinate a comprehensive investigation that would target not just Tyler's securities violations, but the entire network of fraudulent activities he'd constructed around his stolen concepts and misrepresented partnerships. Agent Sarah Kim from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division had become my primary contact for coordinating the investigation. Her expertise in financial fraud cases involving emerging technologies made her uniquely qualified to understand both the technical aspects of Tyler's scheme and the broader implications for the cryptocurrency industry. During our initial meeting at the Federal Building in downtown Austin, Agent Kim had been impressed by the thoroughness of my documentation and the strength of the evidence I'd compiled. "This is one of the most comprehensive fraud cases involving NFTs that we've seen," Agent Kim explained as we reviewed the evidence package in a secure conference room. "The pattern of securities violations, market manipulation, and intellectual property theft creates multiple avenues for prosecution, and the potential damages to investors and artists make this a high-priority case. The investigation would require careful coordination with multiple agencies and stakeholders to ensure that Tyler's criminal activities were fully exposed without compromising ongoing regulatory efforts or harming legitimate participants in the crypto art market." Agent Kim had assembled a team that included prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office, investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission, and specialists from the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. "We want to move quickly to prevent Tyler from causing additional harm to investors or artists," Agent Kim continued. "But we also want to ensure that our investigation serves as a model for how law enforcement can effectively address fraud in cryptocurrency markets without stifling legitimate innovation." The timing was crucial because Tyler had accelerated his fundraising efforts and was actively recruiting artists for his fraudulent projects. Marcus's contacts in the venture capital community had reported that Tyler was becoming increasingly aggressive in his pitches, making more specific claims about artist partnerships and project timelines that would be difficult to fulfill even if his concepts had been legitimate. "He's basically written checks that he can't cash," David Park observed during one of our strategy meetings. "Tyler has promised investors access to established crypto artists and innovative educational content that doesn't exist outside of his imagination. When those promises can't be fulfilled, the fraud will become obvious even to investors who aren't familiar with the crypto art community." But David also warned that Tyler's increasing desperation could make him more dangerous to the artists he was targeting. People who are facing potential criminal exposure often make increasingly risky decisions to protect themselves. If Tyler realizes that his scheme is falling apart, he might try to intimidate witnesses or destroy evidence. The possibility that Tyler might escalate his criminal behavior to include witness intimidation or evidence destruction added urgency to our timeline for legal action. Agent Kim had obtained authorization for electronic surveillance of Tyler's communications and financial activities, but we needed to act quickly to prevent him from destroying evidence or fleeing the jurisdiction. My role in the investigation required a delicate balance between cooperation with law enforcement and protection of my identity within the crypto art community. While I was prepared to testify publicly about Tyler's criminal activities, Agent Kim had suggested that maintaining my cover as crypto mystic during the initial phases of the investigation might allow us to gather additional evidence about Tyler's plans and methods. "If Tyler still believes you're unaware of his activities, He might be willing to reveal more about his scheme, Agent Kim explained. We'd like you to consider having one more interaction with him, under controlled circumstances with full surveillance support. The prospect of confronting Tyler directly while wearing a wire was both terrifying and appealing. It would give me the opportunity to hear Tyler's own admissions of guilt, while providing law enforcement with the kind of recorded evidence that would make his criminal intent undeniable in court. But it would also require me to maintain the performance of being his naive ex-girlfriend while knowing exactly how dangerous his activities had become. Elena and Marcus had volunteered to help coordinate community protection efforts while I worked with law enforcement to expose Tyler's scheme. Their networks within the crypto art world would be crucial for warning other artists about Tyler's recruitment efforts and ensuring that any artists who had already been contacted by Tyler understood their rights and options for legal protection. We've identified at least 12 artists who've received outreach from Tyler or his associates in the past month, Elena reported during one of our encrypted communication sessions. Most of them were intrigued by his promises of venture capital funding and mainstream commercial opportunities. But several have started asking questions about the legitimacy of his claims. Marcus had been monitoring Tyler's social media and professional networking activities, tracking his interactions with potential investors and collaborators. Tyler's been posting increasingly grandiose claims about his upcoming projects and industry connections. He's also been attending crypto art events and networking sessions, trying to build relationships with artists who might be interested in commercial partnerships. The evidence of Tyler's accelerating activities confirmed that he was moving toward the execution phase of his fraud scheme. His increasing public visibility and bold claims about artist partnerships meant that any artists who became involved with his projects would risk having their reputations damaged when his criminal activities were exposed. Agent Kim's surveillance team had identified several upcoming events where Tyler was planning to make presentations about his NFT projects, including a venture capital pitch meeting scheduled for the following week, and a crypto art networking event, where he was planning to recruit additional artist collaborators. These events would provide opportunities to gather additional evidence, while preventing Tyler from expanding his fraudulent activities. We want to let Tyler proceed with his planned presentations so we can document his misrepresentations to investors and artists, Agent Kim explained. But we'll have undercover agents present to ensure that no one actually commits resources based on his fraudulent claims. The strategy required precise timing and coordination to maximize the evidence gathering while minimizing harm to potential victims. Elena and Marcus would use their community connections to ensure that any artists who were considering collaboration with Tyler understood the risks and had access to legal advice. Meanwhile, Agent Kim's team would document Tyler's presentations and communications to build the strongest possible case for prosecution. My final interaction with Tyler was scheduled to take place at another coffee shop meeting, arranged through a casual text message that suggested I'd been thinking about his offer to help me find commercial opportunities for my art. The location was a busy Starbucks in South Austin, chosen for its excellent acoustics for recording equipment and multiple exit routes for surveillance teams. Maya, it's great to hear from you, Tyler had responded to my text message with obvious enthusiasm. I've actually been thinking about our conversation too. I've got some exciting developments in my NFT projects that might be perfect for someone with your artistic background. The eagerness in Tyler's response confirmed that he was actively seeking artists to exploit for his fraudulent projects, and that he still viewed me as a potential victim rather than a threat. His willingness to meet again also suggested that he hadn't discovered my identity as Crypto Mystic, or realized that his criminal activities were under investigation. I arrived at the coffee shop 30 minutes early to coordinate with Agent Kim's surveillance team and test the recording equipment that would capture Tyler's admissions of fraud. The technical setup was sophisticated but discreet, with multiple backup recording systems and real-time monitoring capabilities that would allow law enforcement to intervene immediately if Tyler became threatening or suspicious. Remember, we want to let Tyler talk as much as possible, Agent Kim instructed through my earpiece as I waited for Tyler to arrive. Ask open-ended questions about his projects and funding sources, and let him explain his methods and timeline. The more specific he gets about his plans, the stronger our evidence becomes. Tyler arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather portfolio that presumably contained marketing materials for his fraudulent NFT projects. He looked confident and energetic, clearly excited about the opportunity to recruit me for his schemes, while positioning himself as my benefactor and mentor. "Maya, you look great," Tyler said as he approached my table, and I couldn't help but notice that his assessment of my appearance seemed more calculating than complimentary. "I'm really excited to tell you about what I've been working on. I think you're going to see some amazing opportunities." Tyler launched immediately into a presentation about his NFT projects that was even more grandiose and fraudulent than I'd expected. He claimed to have secured preliminary funding commitments from 3 major venture capital firms, established partnerships with successful crypto artists who would serve as creative consultants, and developed innovative smart contract systems that would revolutionize how educational content was monetized in the blockchain space. The key insight, Tyler explained with the confidence of someone who genuinely believed his own lies, is that most people are intimidated by cryptocurrency and blockchain technology because the educational resources are too technical and inaccessible. What we're creating is a platform that uses beautiful, engaging art to teach complex financial concepts in ways that anyone can understand. I recognized my own concept for educational NFTs being presented back to me with Tyler's typical appropriation of other people's ideas, but the scope of his misrepresentations went far beyond simple intellectual property theft. Tyler was claiming credit for technical innovations he didn't understand, partnerships that didn't exist, and funding commitments that were based on fraudulent documentation. "That sounds incredible," I said, genuinely impressed by the audacity of Tyler's lies. "How did you develop the technical systems for something like that?" "I've been working with a team of blockchain developers who specialize in smart contract innovation," Tyler replied smoothly. "The technical implementation is complex, but the basic concept is about creating programmable art that can deliver educational content based on user interactions and learning progress." Tyler was describing advanced technical concepts with the casual confidence of someone who'd read about them in blog posts but had never actually implemented or understood them. His explanation sounded impressive to someone without technical background, but anyone with actual blockchain development experience would immediately recognize that he was speaking nonsense. "What about the artists you're working with?" I asked, curious about how Tyler would describe his non-existent creative partnerships. "Are they established in the crypto art world?" "Absolutely. I've got commitments from several artists who are already successful in the NFT space. They're excited about the opportunity to work on projects that have real social impact while reaching mainstream audiences through traditional institutional backing." Tyler pulled out his phone and showed me screenshots of conversations with artists, marketing materials that featured impressive-looking artwork, and project timelines that outlined an ambitious development schedule. The documentation looked professional and convincing, but I recognized some of the artwork as pieces that were publicly available through Creative Commons licenses rather than original commissions. "These artists have agreed to work exclusively on your projects?" I asked, knowing that most successful crypto artists maintained independence specifically to avoid the kind of exploitation Tyler was planning. "Well, not exclusively, but they've committed to prioritizing our projects because of the funding and exposure opportunities we can provide," Tyler clarified, revealing the first crack in his confident presentation. "The venture capital backing gives us advantages that most crypto art projects can't offer." Tyler's explanation of his funding sources was even more fraudulent than his claims about artist partnerships. He described investment commitments that were contingent on project milestones that he couldn't achieve, used technical terminology incorrectly to describe blockchain implementations that didn't exist, and made specific promises about return on investment that would be impossible to fulfill even if his projects were legitimate. "The investors are particularly excited about the scalability potential," Tyler continued, warming to his favorite topic of financial projections and market opportunities. "We're projecting that the educational NFT market could reach hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue within 3 years, and our platform is positioned to capture a significant market share." I listened to Tyler describe financial projections that were based on complete fantasy, while presenting them with the authority of someone who'd conducted extensive market research and financial analysis. His confidence in his fraudulent claims was almost hypnotic, and I could understand how investors who weren't familiar with the crypto art space might be convinced by his presentation. "Where do I fit into all of this?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew Tyler's answer. "I want you to be one of our founding artists," Tyler said with obvious enthusiasm. "Your background in traditional art, combined with your design skills, would be perfect for creating the kind of educational content we're developing. Plus, working with our platform would give you access to resources and opportunities that most independent artists never get." Tyler outlined a collaboration arrangement that was even more exploitative than I'd anticipated. According to his proposal, I would create original artwork and educational content for his platform in exchange for a small percentage of revenue and the promise of exposure to mainstream audiences. Tyler would retain ownership of all intellectual property, control all commercial licensing, and have final approval over creative decisions. "The partnership structure is designed to be mutually beneficial," Tyler explained, apparently oblivious to how one-sided his proposal actually was. "You get to focus on the creative work while I handle all the business development, marketing, and investor relations." The offer was exactly what I'd expected from Tyler. Arrangement that would allow him to exploit my creative labor while positioning himself as the business mastermind behind any commercial success. It was the same dynamic that had characterized our personal relationship, scaled up to match his increased resources and ambitions. "How soon would you need me to start working on content?" I asked, curious about Tyler's timeline for implementing his fraudulent projects. "Ideally within the next month. We've got investor presentations scheduled throughout the fall, and having actual artwork and content examples would strengthen our pitch significantly. The sooner we can show concrete progress, the easier it will be to secure additional funding rounds." Tyler's timeline confirmed that he was planning to use artists' work to support his fraudulent fundraising efforts, essentially making creative collaborators unwitting accomplices to securities fraud. Any artist who provided content for Tyler's investor presentations would be helping him deceive potential investors about the legitimacy and progress of his projects. "I'm definitely interested," I said, maintaining the performance of being flattered by Tyler's offer while internally cataloging every criminal admission he was making. "But I'd want to understand more about the legal and financial structure before committing to anything." "Of course, that's smart business thinking," Tyler replied approvingly. "I can have my lawyers draw up a collaboration agreement that outlines all the terms and protections. We want our artists to feel confident about their involvement." Tyler's casual reference to his lawyers was another fabrication, as Agent Kim's investigation had revealed that Tyler hadn't retained legal counsel for his NFT projects and was planning to use template contracts downloaded from the internet. His willingness to promise legal documentation that didn't exist was another example of how Tyler's fraud extended to every aspect of his business development efforts. "What about the other artists you're working with?" I asked. "Would I be able to connect with them to understand their experience with the platform?" Tyler hesitated for the first time during our conversation, and I could see him calculating how to respond to a question that exposed the fabricated nature of his artist partnerships. "The other artists prefer to maintain confidentiality during the development phase, but once we launch publicly, there will be plenty of opportunities for collaboration and community building." The explanation was obviously evasive, and Tyler's discomfort with the question confirmed that his claims about existing artist partnerships were completely fraudulent. He was recruiting me to be his first actual artist collaborator, while presenting my potential involvement as part of an established creative team that existed only in his imagination. "That makes sense," I said diplomatically. "When would you want to move forward with the legal documentation?" "I can have draft agreements ready within a week," Tyler promised. "Once you've had a chance to review the terms, we can schedule a follow-up meeting to finalize everything and discuss your first project assignments." Tyler's eagerness to formalize our collaboration revealed how desperate he was to recruit legitimate artists for his fraudulent projects. His willingness to move quickly through legal documentation also suggested that he was feeling pressure from investors or other stakeholders to demonstrate concrete progress on his promised deliverables. As our conversation wound down, Tyler returned to his familiar pattern of positioning himself as my mentor and benefactor, while subtly undermining my confidence in my ability to succeed independently. "I really think this partnership could be transformative for your career, Maya. The crypto art space is incredibly competitive, and having institutional backing and business expertise can make the difference between struggling as an independent artist and building a sustainable creative practice." Tyler's condescending advice about the crypto art space was particularly galling given that I was already one of the most successful artists in the industry he was trying to exploit. His assumption that I needed his guidance to navigate a market where I'd achieved more success than he could imagine perfectly encapsulated the arrogance that had made our personal relationship unsustainable and was now driving his criminal behavior. "I really appreciate you thinking of me for this opportunity," I said as we prepared to leave the coffee shop. "I'll definitely think seriously about everything you've shared." "Take your time, but not too much time," Tyler replied with a smile that was meant to be encouraging but came across as mildly threatening. "Opportunities like this don't come around often, and I'd hate for you to miss out because you were too cautious." The subtle pressure in Tyler's final comment confirmed that he was using manipulative tactics to rush potential collaborators into agreements before they had time to conduct due diligence or seek independent advice. It was another example of Tyler's predatory approach to artist relationships, and his assumption that creative people could be intimidated into making poor business decisions. After Tyler left the coffee shop, I remained at my table for several minutes to coordinate with Agent Kim's surveillance team and ensure that all recording equipment had captured clear documentation of Tyler's fraudulent claims and criminal admissions. The conversation had exceeded our expectations for gathering evidence, providing clear documentation of Tyler's intent to defraud investors and exploit artists through his fabricated NFT projects. "We have everything we need for criminal charges," Agent Kim confirmed through my earpiece. Tyler's admissions about his funding claims, artist partnerships, and project timeline provide clear evidence of securities fraud and wire fraud. Combined with the documentation you've already provided, this gives us an extremely strong case for prosecution. The recording of Tyler's fraudulent claims would serve as the cornerstone of the federal case against him, but Agent Kim's team had also gathered extensive additional evidence during their surveillance of Tyler's other activities. Electronic monitoring of Tyler's communications had revealed the full scope of his fraudulent documentation and his efforts to deceive both investors and potential artist collaborators. Tyler sent follow-up emails to 3 venture capital firms this morning, making specific claims about artist partnerships and project development that we now know are completely fabricated, Agent Kim explained during our debriefing session. He's also been contacting additional artists through social media and professional networks, using the same deceptive tactics you documented in your conversation. The evidence of Tyler's accelerating criminal activities confirmed the urgency of legal intervention to prevent him from causing additional harm to investors and artists. Agent Kim's team was prepared to execute arrest warrants and search warrants simultaneously to ensure that Tyler couldn't destroy evidence or flee the jurisdiction once he realized that his criminal activities had been discovered. "We're planning to move tomorrow morning," Agent Kim informed me. "Tyler will be arrested at his office and will execute search warrants for his residence, office computers, and electronic devices. We'll also be coordinating with bank regulators to investigate his activities at the financial institution where he works." The timing of Tyler's arrest would be coordinated with community outreach efforts to ensure that any artists who had been contacted by Tyler understood that his projects were fraudulent and that they had legal protections and resources available if they had been harmed by his deceptive practices. Elena and Marcus had prepared comprehensive information packages that would be distributed through crypto art communities as soon as Tyler's arrest became public. "We want to make sure that Tyler's criminal activities don't create broader distrust of legitimate NFT projects or crypto art communities," Elena explained during our final coordination meeting. "The goal is to demonstrate that the community can effectively identify and respond to fraudulent actors while continuing to support legitimate creative innovation." David Park had prepared legal documentation that would allow affected artists and investors to pursue civil remedies against Tyler while the criminal prosecution proceeded. The civil cases would focus on recovering damages and ensuring that Tyler's assets were preserved to compensate victims of his fraudulent activities. Tyler's criminal activities have created liability that extends beyond his personal assets to potentially include his employer and any other institutions that facilitated his fraud, David explained. "We'll be pursuing comprehensive civil remedies to ensure that everyone who was harmed by Tyler's scheme receives appropriate compensation." The morning of Tyler's arrest arrived with unseasonably cool weather and clear skies that seemed appropriate for the clarity that would finally bring Tyler's criminal activities into the light. Agent Kim's team had coordinated with multiple law enforcement agencies to ensure that all aspects of Tyler's fraudulent scheme would be addressed simultaneously, preventing him from destroying evidence or continuing his criminal activities. I watched the news coverage of Tyler's arrest from my apartment, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction, relief, and something approaching closure as I saw Tyler led away in handcuffs while federal agents seized evidence from his office and residence. The local news reports described the charges as involving cryptocurrency fraud and artist exploitation, though the full scope of Tyler's criminal activities would only become apparent as the investigation proceeded. Federal agents today arrested Tyler Brennan, a cryptocurrency specialist with Austin First National Bank, on charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy related to alleged fraudulent investment schemes involving non-fungible tokens and digital art, the news anchor reported. The investigation is ongoing, and authorities say additional charges may be filed as more evidence is analyzed. Tyler's arrest triggered immediate consequences that extended far beyond criminal charges to include professional, financial, and personal ramifications that would reshape every aspect of his life. Austin First National Bank issued a statement announcing Tyler's immediate termination and their full cooperation with federal investigators, while also launching their own internal investigation into whether Tyler had used bank resources or information to facilitate his criminal activities. Austin First National Bank is committed to the highest standards of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct, the bank's statement read. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators and have terminated Mr. Brennan's employment effective immediately. We are also conducting our own comprehensive review to ensure that no bank resources or information were improperly used. The venture capital firms that Tyler had been courting with his fraudulent presentations issued their own statements distancing themselves from Tyler's activities and confirming their cooperation with the federal investigation. Several firms also announced enhanced due diligence procedures for cryptocurrency-related investments to prevent similar fraud in the future. We take investment fraud extremely seriously and are grateful to federal investigators for exposing these alleged criminal activities before any of our investors were harmed, stated Rebecca Martinez, managing partner at Austin Venture Partners. This case highlights the importance of thorough due diligence and verification of claims made by potential investment partners. But the most significant consequences of Tyler's arrest were felt within the crypto art community, where his criminal activities had been exposed through the collaborative efforts of artists, developers, and community advocates who had worked together to protect their shared interests and values. The successful identification and prosecution of Tyler's fraudulent scheme demonstrated that crypto art communities were capable of self-regulation and collective action to address threats to their integrity. Elena's community outreach efforts had successfully warned every artist who had been contacted by Tyler about the fraudulent nature of his projects, ensuring that no legitimate creators had been harmed by his deceptive practices. The response from the community has been incredibly positive, Elena reported. Artists are grateful that we were able to expose Tyler's scheme before anyone was seriously harmed, and they're excited about working together to develop better protective mechanisms for the future. Marcus's work with venture capital firms and institutional investors had helped establish new standards for due diligence in NFT-related investments that would make similar fraud schemes much more difficult to execute. Tyler's case has become a cautionary tale that's being studied by every major crypto investment firm, Marcus explained. The level of documentation and verification that investors now require has significantly increased the barriers to entry for fraudulent actors. David's legal advocacy had resulted in new resources and protections for crypto artists who might be targeted by exploitative business practices or fraudulent investment schemes. We've established legal precedents that will make it easier for artists to seek remedies when they're harmed by fraudulent actors. And we've created educational resources that help artists understand their rights and protections. The revelation of my identity as Crypto Mystic had initially been a source of anxiety, but the community response had been overwhelmingly positive and supportive. Artists and collectors who had appreciated my work under my pseudonym were excited to connect the artwork they admired with the person who had protected their community from exploitation. Learning that Maya Rodriguez is Crypto Mystic just makes your art even more meaningful, commented Isabella Torres, a crypto art collector who had purchased several of my pieces. Knowing that the artist behind those beautiful, technically sophisticated works is also someone who fights to protect other artists makes the work more valuable, not less. My decision to reveal my identity had also opened up new opportunities for collaboration and community leadership that wouldn't have been possible while maintaining anonymity. Several crypto art platforms had invited me to serve as an advisor on artist protection and community safety, while multiple galleries and museums had expressed interest in exhibiting my work now that they could connect it with my advocacy efforts. Your combination of artistic excellence and community leadership represents exactly the kind of values we want to support, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, curator of contemporary art at the Austin Museum of Digital Arts. We'd be honored to host an exhibition of your work that tells the story of how crypto artists can protect themselves and their communities. Tyler's criminal trial proceeded swiftly as the overwhelming evidence of his fraudulent activities made a plea bargain the only realistic option for his defense attorneys. Faced with clear documentation of securities fraud, wire fraud, and multiple counts of criminal conspiracy, Tyler ultimately agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence recommendation. Mr. Brennan's crimes represent a serious violation of trust that harmed both individual victims and the broader cryptocurrency community, stated Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh during Tyler's sentencing hearing. His systematic deception of investors and exploitation of artists demonstrated a callous disregard for the rights and interests of others that warrants significant criminal punishment. Tyler was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison followed by 3 years of supervised release, during which he would be prohibited from working in financial services or cryptocurrency-related industries. He was also ordered to pay restitution to the investors and artists who had been harmed by his fraudulent activities, though the full amount of damages was still being calculated as the investigation continued. "I want to apologize to everyone who was harmed by my actions," Tyler said during his sentencing hearing, reading from a prepared statement that his attorneys had clearly crafted to minimize his culpability. "I made serious errors in judgment that I deeply regret, and I take full responsibility for the consequences of my actions." Tyler's apology felt hollow and self-serving, focusing more on his own remorse than on the actual harm he had caused to others. His statement carefully avoided acknowledging the systematic and predatory nature of his criminal activities, instead framing his behavior as mistakes, rather than deliberate choices to exploit and defraud others. But the most meaningful resolution came not from Tyler's punishment, but from the positive changes that his exposure had catalyzed within the crypto art community and the broader cryptocurrency industry. New protective mechanisms, enhanced due diligence procedures, and stronger community networks had emerged from the collective response to Tyler's criminal activities. "Tyler's fraud attempt actually made our community stronger," Elena reflected during a celebration gathering that brought together many of the artists, developers, and advocates who had worked to expose his scheme. "We learned that we can effectively protect ourselves and each other when we work together and share information." The collaborative investigation that had exposed Tyler's criminal activities had also strengthened relationships and trust networks within the crypto art community that would provide ongoing benefits for legitimate creators and innovators. Artists who had participated in the investigation had developed new skills and confidence in protecting their rights and interests, while investors and institutions had gained better understanding of how to evaluate and support authentic crypto art projects. "What happened with Tyler showed everyone that crypto artists aren't naive or vulnerable," Marcus observed. "We're sophisticated professionals who understand our industry and can defend ourselves against exploitation." That recognition has changed how institutions and investors approach the crypto art space. 6 months after Tyler's arrest, I stood in the main gallery of the Austin Museum of Digital Arts, surrounded by prints of my NFT collections and interactive displays that allowed visitors to explore the intersection of cryptocurrency technology and artistic expression. The exhibition, titled quote 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 quotes, had drawn record crowds and significant media attention as the first major museum exhibition to focus specifically on crypto art and community protection. This exhibition represents a pivotal moment in the recognition of cryptocurrency-based art as a legitimate and important artistic medium. Dr. Sarah Kim explained to a gathering of press and community members during the exhibition opening. But more importantly, it tells the story of how artistic communities can protect themselves and their values in a rapidly evolving technological landscape. The exhibition included documentation of Tyler's fraudulent scheme and the community response that had exposed his criminal activities, presenting the investigation as a case study in collective action and community protection. Visitors could explore interactive timelines that showed how artists and advocates had worked together to identify threats and develop protective mechanisms. The goal is to ensure that other artistic communities can learn from our experience and develop their own protective strategies, I explained during my remarks at the exhibition opening. Tyler's fraud attempt was ultimately unsuccessful because we worked together to expose it, but the real victory is that we've built systems and relationships that will prevent similar schemes in the future. The exhibition had attracted visitors from around the world, including artists, technologists, and community organizers, who were interested in understanding how creative communities could protect themselves against exploitation while maintaining openness to innovation and collaboration. The story of Tyler's exposure had become a model for community-driven accountability that was being studied and adapted by other creative industries. Elena had established a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting crypto artists and protecting them against exploitation, using lessons learned from Tyler's case to develop educational resources and legal support services. We want to make sure that every artist in the crypto space has access to the information and resources they need to protect themselves, Elena explained. Marcus had co-founded a platform that provided technical infrastructure and business support for crypto artists, while maintaining community ownership and control. The goal is to create alternatives to exploitative business models by giving artists the tools and resources they need to maintain independence and control over their work. David had expanded his legal practice to focus specifically on crypto art and digital rights, providing affordable legal services to artists, while also advocating for policy changes that would strengthen protections for creative professionals in emerging technology industries. As I walked through the exhibition, reading visitors' comments and observing their engagement with the artwork and educational materials, I reflected on how completely my life had been transformed by the decision to expose Tyler's criminal activities. The woman who had sat across from Tyler in that coffee shop, listening to him mansplain cryptocurrency while he unknowingly bragged about owning her artwork, felt like a different person entirely. Tyler had believed he was exploiting a struggling artist who lacked the knowledge and resources to protect herself against his predatory business practices. Instead, he had encountered someone with the technical expertise, financial resources, and community connections necessary to expose his criminal activities and hold him accountable for his actions. More importantly, Tyler's fraud attempt had catalyzed broader changes that strengthened protections for all crypto artists and created new models for community-driven accountability and mutual support. His criminal behavior had ultimately served to demonstrate the sophistication and effectiveness of crypto art communities in protecting their shared interests and values. The final validation came not from Tyler's punishment or even from the recognition my artwork had received, but from the knowledge that other artists were safer and more empowered because of the collective action we had taken to expose his fraudulent scheme. The crypto art community had proven that it could effectively identify and respond to threats while continuing to support innovation and creative expression. Tyler had approached the crypto art world believing he could exploit it the same way he had exploited my work during our personal relationship. He had discovered instead that underestimating a community could be even more dangerous than underestimating an individual, especially when that community was built on principles of transparency, collaboration, and mutual support. As I stood in the gallery surrounded by my artwork and the story of how we had protected our community, I realized that Tyler's greatest failure hadn't been criminal or professional, but imaginative. He had been unable to envision a world where artists were sophisticated, empowered, and capable of defending themselves against exploitation. His criminal scheme had been built on assumptions about creative people that were not just wrong but dangerously outdated. The crypto art community had demonstrated that artists in emerging technology spaces could be both innovative creators and effective advocates for their own rights and interests. We had shown that creativity and business acumen were not mutually exclusive, and that artistic communities could develop their own protective mechanisms without relying on traditional institutional gatekeepers. Tyler's story had ended with criminal conviction and professional destruction, but our story was just beginning. The networks, resources, and protective mechanisms we had developed while exposing his fraud would continue to serve crypto artists and other creative communities facing similar challenges in the future. The woman who had discovered her husband planning her murder through a baby monitor had taught me that sometimes the best response to betrayal was patient, systematic action that exposed the full scope of wrongdoing while building something better from the wreckage. Tyler's attempt to exploit me had similarly resulted in his own destruction while strengthening the community he had tried to colonize. Justice, I had learned, was not just about punishment for wrongdoing, but about building systems and relationships that prevented future harm while empowering those who had been targeted for exploitation. Tyler's criminal conviction was satisfying, but the lasting legacy of our collective response would be the protection and empowerment of other artists who might otherwise have been vulnerable to similar schemes. Standing in that gallery, surrounded by artwork that had been created in anonymity but was now displayed with pride and recognition, I understood that Tyler's greatest miscalculation had been believing that crypto art was just another market to be exploited, rather than a community to be respected. He had learned too late that some communities fight back, and when they do, the results can be spectacular. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.